All right. Well, thanks everyone for viewing these videos. Dan Pacheco is up next from Syracuse University, but first I wanted to thank all our sponsors and all the people helping us. First of all, I'd like to start off by thanking the NCSA for letting us use this lecture hall and hosting us. And then, of course, the University of Illinois, where we are. And additionally, our sponsors include the College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Lincoln, Nebraska, and the Richard and Leslie Frank Center for Leadership and Innovation in Media, the Mid-America Press Institute, Investigate Midwest, and of course, our funder, the Knight Foundation, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which is headquartered in Florida. So without any further ado, welcome Dan Pacheco.
Thank you, Brant. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, NCSA and Knight Foundation. Yeah, I'm here to talk about something fun. It could be used for journalism. It could also just be used for fun stuff. And it's mobile-friendly digital dioramas, I call it. No shoebox required, and I have cute little robots created by Dolly to kind of help this along. So just a little about me. I think basically this slide just says I've done a lot of things. I've worked in journalism. I've mostly digital. Actually, Gary and I both worked on the breaking news desk in raw HTML back in the early days, and we survived. The last 10 plus years now, I've been working as a professor. I'm the Peter A. Horvitz Journalism Innovation Chair at Syracuse University. Best job I've ever had, because I get to help the next generation basically try all kinds of crazy stuff. So Robert and I have similar kind of cohorts, different flavors, I think, of the same ice cream. I have been so busy doing so many things that I actually wrote a book about it. So if you're interested, that's the book. It's called Experimenting with Emerging Media Platforms. It's very practically oriented. What I'm going to be showing you today is really kind of just one little aspect of that. It has a combination of sort of like tips and tricks for VR, AR, a little bit of AI, although when the book was being written, because of the book production process, AI does show up in the book, but it was the very early days of like pre-chat GPT. A lot of stuff with open source, which is really what I'm going to get into today. And something that I think was really fun for me is interviewing industry experts, a lot of different people from Nani de la Peña to Thomas Saymat and the EU and many others, just talking about all the crazy stuff they've done and tried, and things that worked and what didn't work, and the spaghetti they threw in the wall that stuck, and also what ended up on the floor, which I think is a very important thing to talk about when you're talking about innovation. But I'm not trying to sell my book here, because as the cute little robots have to say, the website has all this free stuff. If you go to emergingmediaplatforms.com, there are templates for open source things that you can do, starting from making your first little web page to creating fully interactive 3D stuff on the web. I personally, while I love Routledge and they sell my book and they make the money in the book, the website is completely mine, and I just keep throwing stuff up there. So there's sort of one example of something that is up on that website. Has anybody ever tried to create a 360 photo gallery with hotspots? Maybe you've seen those on like a realtor website. And you thought, oh, I could do a 360 gallery tour of, I don't know, a research lab, or somewhere that people, want to go, but they can't go. And you can do those, but it costs you money, unless you know how to find the code that works on every modern web browser to do it yourself. So this is actually something that's running off my GitHub page right now. So GitHub is where you can put free code, and it doesn't cost you anything. And you can if you put the right code up there and you just have your assets, you have a 360 photo gallery. So these are a lot of the things, especially after the pandemic, when I was teaching students things like immersive virtual reality, and they were using these, beefy lab computers, and they had Unity running on them and all this Adobe stuff. And then they had to go home. Remember that? We all had to like retreat to our bedrooms and couches, and they were using their laptops. And I could almost see the smoke coming up in front of their face and their laptops in Zoom. And I had to shift away from all that stuff towards things like what I'm going to show you here. This actually emerged from that. But 360 is not what I'm going to be talking about today. Instead, oh, and I'm also not going to talk about putting anything on your face for, I think, the first time ever at this conference. You don't have to do anything on your face. In fact, this is the first time I've ever presented here talking about just things you can do on your phone, mobile Me&You, which there's a reason for that. The biggest one is that a project that I had worked on with students called Visualizing 81, which I'll show in a second, we realized, okay, we can't just make something. We know we could make it for VR, but we know that most people aren't going to then put the thing on their face. So let's just take all these technologies and make things that work on their phones. And that turned out to be the right approach. I'm not against putting things in your face. We'll see what happens with Apple's Vision Pro, but right now we're sort of in this in-between stage. So I want you all to kind of put on your imagination caps, and I want you to connect with your inner child. So you're going to go back in time. Hopefully, when you were growing up, you spent a lot of time with stuff like this: crayons and scissors and paper, cardboard, right? To do things like this, make adorable little dioramas. Anybody remember making dioramas? Fun fact, I asked this engineering student who works for me from India. I was like, diorama? She's like, no, what is a diorama? But when I described what it is, she's like, oh, okay. Yes, I did that. And these really, like I use this as an analogy because this is something we've all been doing since we were little, right? We, go to a history, class in the 4th grade or something, and then they bring the shoe boxes out and they're like, okay, now you're going to put together a little diorama with your scissors and pipe cleaners and glue, and you're going to recreate this part of history, whether it's, the story of Thanksgiving, which of course we know was not complete, or certain, I don't know, something about, I don't know, give me a history story, any kind of history. It was very much around history, understanding our world, right? We do this, and like that is immersive media, all right? It was like but it's super accessible. And you can do that kind of thing on your phone. So we're talking about like really, really simple things, which I'm going to show you. So keep that idea of digital diorama in mind. But you might be wondering, as our next cute little Dolly created robot here, I used Midjourney, and then I used Dolly 3 in ChatGPT. So how does that connect with news, right? It sounds kind of like, okay, this is the after lunch guy trying to wake people up. But what if the content in your diorama is reality based? It's stuff that exists in the real world, and you're just like a photographer capturing things. You're actually capturing the thing, maybe even the environment. So Robert talked about photogrammetry earlier. That's really what I'm alluding to here, but there are other ways of doing this coming down the pike. There's something called nerfs. Anyone heard of nerfs? Right? Anyone made a nerf? Ooh, I'm going to be the first one to make a nerf then. Just kidding. You probably will beat me. But this idea, like, you can use what's called light fields to just capture like the way that light bounces off things, and then you can do other things with that. That's also a potential tool for immersion. Yeah, the shoebox is basically any phone with a web browser, and the web browser is the key. I know that you can make apps. Apple's Vision Pro supposedly will make every app that works on an iPad work on your face. Maybe that'll be great, maybe not. But I'm not excited about that. I'm excited about the one app that everybody uses every day, maybe even every minute, which is the mobile web browser. It is the best app ever created. And the reason it's the best is because anyone can make stuff that shows up in it. And the whole, those worlds that you create that are reality based have simple HTML code in them. So I'm guessing everybody here at this conference has done stuff with HTML, probably a lot of it. But a lot of times when I show this to, say, students in their 20s who have to take my class, Foundations of Data and Digital Journalism, 1/3 of which consists of learning the basics of HTML and CSS, I start off with a survey and I say, okay, like, what's your experience with HTML? Usually they say, like, nobody's had any experience with it, okay? Occasionally, a couple hands will sheepishly go up. I ask, oh, what did you use it for? It's like, oh, well, I have to put a YouTube thing into WordPress for this other class. I'm like, okay, well, you're using HTML, right? But you don't know how it works. We're now actually requiring all of our students to know the basics, so they can do stuff like what I'm going to show you, and they can imagine and not have to be always locked into proprietary platforms, because that's how the internet is supposed to work. And then here, imagine, so on the left, what you see is an example of the digital diorama I'm talking about. And if you like, you can scan this QR code and you can try this yourself. So if you look on the left here, you'll see it. So that's a web page. And the way it works on your phone is if you tap and hold your thumb down, you will move forward. If you tap and hold 2 thumbs down or 2 fingers, you'll move backward. And then you change direction by doing this. So you can go into the little world that I've published to this web page. And I always get excited saying this. That's a web page, people. Web pages do not have to be rectangles and squares, okay? And I say squares now because we have watches that are square. But yeah, our media is all stuck in rectangles. Well, it's actually not. It's just that people aren't really moving beyond the rectangle. Is it working? Hope. Good. All right. So really simple, really accessible. Depending on your phone and browser, sometimes you can like turn it sideways and then it's like you see in a different aspect ratio. It almost feels like a magic window into another world. Someone was talking about Stranger Things earlier. It's like, it's sort of like a positive, actually, this is more Stranger Things because it has, it's nighttime. And yeah, so what you see there, by the way, is something that a former speaker at this conference, Susan Polton, and I, we got together in Philadelphia during the Online News Association conference. She lives there. And we went to the neighborhood she lives in, which is in Old City, Philadelphia. That is a bell that I 3D scanned in like 20 seconds. It was the prototype for the Liberty Bell. Okay, so it's an object. It has historical significance. This is totally a diorama, right? I could be a 4th grader and do that. And then, unlike the diorama, where then it's like, well, I have to then get that in the school bus and hope that all my little animals and things don't fall apart, and it gets wet and rained on. Well, I can share it with my friends. I just send a link, right? Well, that's also true for all of us. For people in media, journalism, we're wanting to engage people and inform them about things. I could use something like this to then connect somebody with the history of that bell. Turns out that bell, by the way, is almost, I think it's 50 years older than the Liberty Bell, and it was created in England. I didn't know, right? So I have ideas for what to do with that project. Other things I just want to point out here is that you see other things there, right? You see night sky, you see grass, keep that in mind. You see the bell, of course, you see some text, and then you see this wall. So fun fact, I didn't scan the wall, and that's the wall is a stand-in. That is a randomly scanned wall from somewhere in, I think, Ireland, that someone just threw up in Sketchfab and let anyone download. So you can also, it's like almost like 3D scrapbooking when you're just trying to kind of learn how to do this stuff. You just take stuff, with permission that's, people allow you to, and then you can put them into your little digital dioramas, just like when you were a little kid. And then you can make it better. And then as a journalist, you'd make it more reality based, right? But you kind of layer all these things together. And in the XR space, we call in gaming and everything, we call those assets. Let's keep those terms in mind too, right? Everything that you see and it can interact with is an asset. So where this actually kind of came from. It's not like I just sat down one day and said, I'm going to like teach people how to make dioramas. It was a project that I worked on called Visualizing 81. It actually got the SPJ's Mark of Excellence in 2022. It was a ONA Knight Foundation funded project through Journalism 360. And it was basically about this urban highway project in the 1960s that divided Syracuse along racial lines. And we wanted to just really connect people to that story as the future of that whole highway, which needs to come down now and will be coming down soon. There's talk about creating what they call a community grid, and let's bring everyone back together. And so with the students, we sat down and we thought, well, I mean, do people really know the story of that, like the history? How can you really imagine the future as with something like a community grid? Sounds great, right? But I mean, the community grid could be end up bought up by Starbucks and Costco's and who else, right? And like hotels. Like, is that really gonna bridge divides? No, it starts with understanding. So what you see here is actually, and I talked about this in previous years, so it's up on the website. That's the inside of what turns out to be the oldest African-American church in Syracuse that was abandoned when the highway went up, because then 4,400 families basically found themselves needing to leave. And the church was in the middle of what then became a ghost town with the big highway. And so we used photogrammetry to scan the inside of it so people could go back into it before it gets renovated. Because now that's part of the plan, is to kind of bring that church back as a training center for young Black, I think restaurant people want to like open restaurants or something, but to kind of revitalize. So we're using these, like that diorama was really meant to connect people with that place. Turns out that church, it's called the AME Church of Zion, was the center of the civil rights movement in Syracuse as well. So it's like, has all this historical significance. All right, so let's talk about the tech a little bit. What I'm going to show you for how I made the dioramas and how you can also make it too is a technology called A-Frame. So what is A-Frame? Well, if you go to this website, aframe.io, you can learn about it. It's very techy, but they do things to make it more accessible. And it basically supercharges HTML to be able to show 3D stuff. And the stuff, these assets, can be 360 content. It can be primitive objects, which is things like a plane, which is a term for a piece of paper is a plane. This floor here would be a plane. And then you can have assets like images, right? So I could actually take a picture of this carpet here, and then I could apply that as a JPEG to that plane, and then I'd have this carpet in my world. And you can bring in 3D models. They can be things you create, or you have an artist create, or that you scan, right? And all of this stuff, it's almost like this big free Lego box. Okay. So yeah, I said, imagine, go back to your childhood, right? Think about when you were making things. I love A-Frame because it makes it easy for somebody who knows just basic HTML. I'm looking at you, Gary, because I know you did it, because we did it back in the late 90s. Oh, wow, you can make this 3D stuff and you don't have to pay anybody for it. You can actually publish it for free. I feel really kind of tingly talking about this right here in the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, NCSA, because the first web browser I used, and maybe some of you, was NCSA Mosaic. Anybody recognize this? Okay, and the web pages were like super ugly, right? They had no layout. It was long toilet paper scrolls. You had text, link, just like this. Images, everything was blue around it. But it was the first, and it was built around open standards that make the internet. And the fact that we should all thank our lucky stars that the internet is still free and open source for the most part, right? If you can access it, well, you can also then put stuff into it and other people can access that. And that's, I think, the most important thing that we all need. Like, it's our job to preserve that, I think, as journalists in particular, because that is the foundation of free speech in a digital economy or digital society. So right here, it was created. And the open web has evolved. Obviously, we have, just like we have layout with CSS and things like that. Well, we also can put 3D stuff in it. So 3D scanning, which you heard about earlier today, there are many different ways to go about 3D scanning. I've tried a lot of different things going back years. In fact, Robert, I think I 3D scanned you with a structure sensor at an ONA like 8 years ago. When you showed that, I'm like, I have this in memory because I have it in my account. I'm gonna, but like this stuff is not new, but it's becoming more accessible, and you can do it from your phone. So I'll show you kind of some ways that I use that. And once you get the right model, then you can do stuff with it. So you learned from Robert Hernandez about how you can do things with augmented reality, which is really cool. I've had my students use those templates with Snapchat, very, very cool. But you can also do this kind of like diorama approach. There's a lot of different ways you can use these. And so this here is actually, this is a picture of a statue right here on campus. So when I arrived yesterday, I went around on campus and I was 3D scanning stuff. This was the best one. So has anybody seen this who's from here? Okay. What is it called? I'll have to ask you afterwards because I want to put the story of it into my diorama. But at first it looks like a person, right? So really realistic. I thought at first it was an actor, that if I went up and took the picture, then he'd be like, boo, right? And I'd have to pay him a tip. But it's just a really cool statue. So what you're seeing here is Polycam. So I have the graphic up there. This is a 3D scan that emerged about 10 minutes later. Pretty good, right? Now I'm using an iPhone Pro that has a LiDAR sensor, but I didn't use the LiDAR mode. I used just the photo mode, which works better for objects like this. If you look closely, you'll see that he's reading a book. You can make out the cover of that book. You can even go in there and read the book. It's pretty cool. You can see like the text on the inside. And what I did here is I scanned it with Polycam, and then I uploaded it right from this app into a website called Sketchfab. I should put the link here, but it's just called Sketch, like sketching, and then Fab, like Fab5. And once it's there, then automatically it's set up so you can download 3D optimized models that work in A-frame. This is that same experience that I created, but it's on, a desktop. Here we go. And with this, I'm using my arrow keys or WASD keys, like I'm in a game, Minecraft or something, and then use the mouse to then kind of point around. So the content that comes out of an A-frame scene is also multi-platform automatically, but it's anything that uses a browser, right? So that's going to be a mobile phone browser, a desktop browser, but also most VR headsets now, they have either they use a browser in the computer, or if it's an Oculus standalone, or probably even the Vive standalone, they have a browser in there, and you can actually go to these links and they just work and you're fully immersed. So you don't have to publish different versions, right? If you know anybody, or maybe you yourself have created apps at your company, it's like, you have the iOS team and the Android team, right? All that goes away when you're using things like you're using open source stuff that works for the web. So this scene, if you would like to go experiment with it, you can scan that code. There's a link here too for those of you who watch this later and see the presentation. But that was all. I wouldn't say it was easy, because there are a lot of steps you have to go through to optimize things. But the template, I made it once, and I can just reuse that over and over again. So what else can you put in your little diorama? You could link different worlds that you create together, just like you link web pages together. All right. So I could have in that space, just like with the 360 photo I showed you, I have 4 objects around that, and they each have a hyperlink that goes to a different web page. All right. So this is kind of like, hey, if you can make, static web pages, link them together conceptually, you can also do this. It is not that much more work. You can allow people to click on buttons that load audio or embedded 2D video. So you could have like little movie theaters there with videos that are playing that people can then click and play. Right? We don't have to go to some service and pay them $8 a month or $20 a month. I feel like $8 is going away now. Everything is like 20 or 25. Just like eggs went up in price. You can have models that animate. as avatars. And then there are a lot of other things you can do. Then the coding gets more complicated, right? But you can start with something, you always start with something simple. And then, yeah, you could find someone who's really good at those other things, right? And then kind of bring them in and collaborate. There are tools that are starting to come out that will write things like A-frame. Babylon JS, by the way, is another framework, kind of like A-frame for creating 3D stuff. I think we'll probably see tools that create that. Reach is something, if you go to reach.love, beta.reach.love, Nani de la Peña runs that. And I've provided it, I've worked as an advisor for them, and there's some cool stuff you can do in that. And I like that, but it's writing A-frame. Okay. So that's what I want people to understand, is that all of this is based on open standards. So I'm just going to quickly demystify A-frame for you here. So hopefully most of you here or watching this know this, right? It's like the most basic web page ever. You have HTML and the /HTML. Then you have the header area for your title. Then you have the body, right? Then you have stuff in there, right? Okay. To enable something to show 3D, you just put that little piece of code in the head. Now it's a 3D web page. You can get that from the aframe.io site. You can also download the entire, this is for the geekier ones, so you could download the entire A-frame package and put it on your website so you're not dependent on them. And you're allowed to do that because it's open source, but most people don't. And then down here, you can see, all right, instead of just having paragraph tags, I put these A-scene tags in. I open it and I close it. And then inside, everything in there, that's my world. Following? Right? I mean, this is structurally, it's not too difficult. And then inside your scene, well, then you put your assets in. So this is the code for an asset. It uses something called an entity tag. Don't worry about that too much. But the file format that I get from Polycam and Sketchfab is a GLB file. So that's kind of like the JPEG of 3D models, for lack of a better term. And then you see things like position. That's X, Y, Z. And then rotation, X, Y, Z. You're rotating around these different, planes, just like it's a chart. And then scale is increase this by this much, increase this, X, Y, Z also. All right. And then you could put a model name in there. So it's not hard to do that. And actually, A-frame itself has a tool built into A-frame. I didn't put this in my presentation, so those of you who are taking notes, I want you to listen. When you look at anything that was made in A-frame, if on a Mac, if you hold down Control Option I, you'll see what's called the A-frame inspector come up, and it lets you move things around. And there are some tricks for how to save things and get your code. I won't get into that here, but there are some there's some built-in tools, which I think is pretty cool, right? Has anybody seen a website that has tools that you can just turn on by waving a magic wand to then like change stuff? There's inspector, but it's not like this. This is actually pretty cool. Then you have a sky. So there's A-sky. And if you take a 360 photo or you find one, there's a website called Polyhaven that's really great for finding 360s. I think Dolly now will create 360 skyboxes for you, right? So you can kind of decide how you want to go about that, and you put that code in there. And then same thing, like it's a JPEG, and then it's like XYZ, rotate. A plane. So I talked about this right here, right? This floor or the grass or whatever. Okay, A-plane, and then I have an image that I map onto it. Same stuff, right? And then once you've settled that up, you may think, oh, I need to have a server. Oh, that's going to cost me money. Oh, I need a webmaster. It's like, no, you don't need any of that. You don't need to pay Squarespace like whatever dollars per month or Wix or anything. You can just go to this link on GitHub, pages.github.com. If you've never used GitHub, you should make an account and then go to pages.github.com, do what it says, and you get a free spot to throw all your files, and then you get links free. Okay. But if you don't want to go that far, there's a really great website called Glitch. I use this with most of my students who are learning the basics of HTML, and then also for the 3D stuff. and you just go to new project and you make a basic website. You click hello website and then you just erase their code. You put your code in there and then you have a preview and it just works. And it does work with A-Frame. So I have a template that you can use here. There's a QR code I have a link to from the slides are up. This will open Glitch up and you can then save it in your notes. And the way you would use that is you make your Glitch account, which is free also. And then you click this button at the top that says remix. Then you get your own version of it. And then you just kind of play around. So this is what I have all my students do as well. Last thing here, well, okay. So now we know that this is possible, right? That's kind of how it all starts. Like, hey, did you know you can do this? And it's free and it's built upon the open standards of the internet and it is applicable to journalism. Well, once you understand all that, then it's like, well, what kind of stories could we create as dioramas that we then have embedded into our stories, that are mostly web-based? Even if your news organization has an app, most likely everything is in HTML2. It could be in the CMS. You may have to talk to the right developer and give them a case of beer or something, but it is possible, right? These are the sort of stories I've seen students create. So things about arts. We have an arts journalism program at my school. So they'll go to the different art galleries in town, get permission to 3D scan things, and then tell the stories about them. And if you're not in the art world, I mean, there are so many stories built into that are just like, art is about stories, it's about people, it's about communities. I had somebody go and scan a whole bunch of Yoruban African statues. And then he kind of overlaid all the stories of, what they meant. They were tied into different deities. And it was really like pretty deep stuff. The history, we talked about that. I do want to find out what the story is behind that person statue that I scanned. So I'll have to find somebody here and you can tell me. And then documenting what's lost. This is a big new area. It's happened in Ukraine. If you want to see a really amazing website, go to Backup Ukraine. It's actually run by Polycam. And when the Ukraine invasion began, Polycam set up this process where they told people, hey, we know you're going to lose a lot. Just start scanning things that are important to you. So it's really, when you go there, it's sort of haunting because a lot of the things that have been captured, people's entire rooms, objects important to them, family keepsakes, like they may not exist anymore. And, we might be seeing the same thing happening in Palestine right now, right? So like, this is something that just continually comes up with climate change. A lot of parts of our world will disappear. People will be displaced. We need solutions to that, but they also can kind of save their legacy. We can help them. So those are just some ideas I had. I would love to talk to people afterwards about ideas you might have, and I'd love to collaborate along with my students as well. So that's my presentation about digital dioramas. Here's my contact info. My cute little dolly generated robots wave goodbye, and let me know if you have any questions.
This was awesome, Dan. Thank you. Your demonstration of A-Frame and Glitch kind of reminds me of this question that keeps coming up year after year. Those applications are so powerful on the web. Are we getting close to a point in your mind where there's not a competitive advantage for an app with the technology of the web catching up?
I mean, great question. So I thought about this also in the sense of VR, because I've worked on things and had students work on things in VR that basically become inaccessible as the technology moves. And the VR, initially the only way to create VR content was essentially through an app that something like Unity would then save as an executable, and not just an app, but an app that only would work initially on a Windows computer. So I think the proprietary nature of downloadable software programs is what you should really call them, whether it's an app on your phone or it's something you have to download to your device or you download on your computer. I don't think those are going away, but I think there needs to be really compelling value proposition for someone to go through the friction of, to get past that awkwardness and have to, just install something. They may not have space on their device for that. That happens a lot with students. So I tend to not, I have to always have another option, even for something to download on their computer. because otherwise they have to clear stuff off, right? But most importantly, I just feel like links, I think content works best when it can be easily shared, and stuff that's in an app is not as easily shared. I mean, if it is, it's still sent as a link, and then it takes you to an app, you know, it says, please download our app, usually on a web page. So I think given that, like, I do feel like, I'm not going to say, oh, all information needs to be free, right? I think information needs to be accessible, and the internet, as it was originally designed, is still the most accessible way to get information out there. Then after that, you can decide, okay, you know, is there something really special that we can only do in an app, right? Well, then it would make sense. Otherwise, you're just kind of creating friction for your audience. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have our, radio station's website. Is there?
is that WILL by chance?
Oh my gosh, it is.
Because we were there yesterday.
Yes.
So glad you're here.
Okay. Anyway. Do you recommend people, is there a way to embed like 3D things within a web page?
There is.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's using either iframe or embed tags. And that's been the case for like 20 years. So yeah. So you could have content living on a web server outside of your CMS, as long as you can if you can embed a YouTube video, then you can embed that page inside your content.
Nice. Okay. Thank
Super
you.
exciting, isn't it? I don't know why people don't talk about this more. The internet works that way. Thank you, NCSA and Mosaic. Yeah. Right. Is that all? Oh, I think there's a question back there.
Dan, thanks a lot. Awesome. How much time does it take for you to create that 3D thing that you did?
Well, I'll say
between zero and uploading and making it visible like that on the site that you had.
So once you have everything kind of laid out the way you would want it to be, which is really like the 3D template, it takes really just a few minutes. Setting up your template, you're creating an environment, right? So think about when you're planning for a party or an event with a lot of people, and you have to kind of set up that space. That does take some time, right? But it's very similar to that. I didn't show you the A-frame inspector because I thought it'd be too much, but I could show anybody who would like to see afterwards. That's so almost like the environment. It's like the designer. Unfortunately, it doesn't let you save anything. You have to copy code snippets, but you can handle it. I do really feel like we're not far from there just being ubiquitous tools that just create worlds, because that's going to be necessary for the metaverse as envisioned by all these huge companies. Yes, it looks like a lot of metaverse is sort of on hold currently because they're focused on AI, but it hasn't gone away. And the fact that the internet supports this, there are a lot of startups out there that kind of are invested in this, and there are audiences already. But even given that, though, I think it's still worth learning and experimenting with 3D HTML, right? And there are different frameworks. A framework is basically some code that someone makes available that's easy for you to then surface within your HTML when it's an HTML framework. They're usually written in JavaScript. So there's Babylon.js. A-frame is basically JavaScript, a JS. There's something called 3.js. I wouldn't worry about that. That's a little bit too hard, but A-frame I found to be the most accessible for students who have never done anything with the web. And within like one assignment from learning it 1 week, they're publishing stuff. Yeah. Oh, she needs a microphone.
So with the statue example, and you were talking about telling a story, obviously you're not putting words in there. So are you just like linking audio or web pages to help tell whatever story you're trying to say? Or is it just with the surroundings that you're...
It's a great question. So those are all just sort of design choices that you can make, right? And that's also true even if you're using something like the Snap Lens Studio, or even Unity, which is used a lot for like full VR systems. The primary ways that I see stories sort of emerging in space, because that's really what it is, it's spatial storytelling, is you approach someone or something, and then when you pass sort of an invisible line that's been drawn around them, you sort of trigger the audio to play. That's pretty common. You can also trigger an animation. So let's say that that statue, we were able to animate it, which actually that one wouldn't work, but there could be another version that could. Then if there were animations built into it, then that trigger could then trigger the animation, which would be the statue standing up and then maybe waving, and then it triggers an audio saying hi. You could have text appear, right? You can kind of decide that. But to your point, it's just knowing that it's possible doesn't mean that, well, then you automatically know what the right way is to go about things. So you do need to spend some time thinking about the space and then what happens in the space, right? So go back to the, I'm gonna have this party, right? What's my perfect party? Who's gonna talk to who? What's, okay, how do I make sure that the right people are sitting next to each other? How do I, what's my ideal scenario? Then you kind of set the scene and the environment up so that that's more likely to happen, but you still don't know because they can choose to go that way instead of that way, right? Who wants a party where it's like, okay, first you're gonna go here, you're gonna get your cake, then you're gonna get your drink, then you're gonna only talk to Chris, then you're gonna leave. You're not gonna go to that party. You have to design the ideal experience.
Just a quick one then. As you have gotten away from relying solely on goggles to present 3D worlds or 3D and are more using these tools, has enough time gone by for you to assess if you're reaching more people?
Through immersive media?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you for sure that when you have things that are available on any web browser with the link, then you always reach more people. So I feel like that needs to be the default for anything that is engagement driven, okay? But then after that, I do feel like there are, I know there are compelling reasons then for people to dive in more. And I was at lunch, I was talking to some people about I'm a juror on the Peabody Awards for interactive titles last year and also this year, and I saw some amazing stuff that even though I have every VR headset you could possibly need through my lab, I don't spend a lot of time in them, but some types of experiences I go back in to and it doesn't matter if I spend 30 minutes because the story within them is so compelling. Sometimes there are other people through avatars in these spaces, right? So I think immersion in goggles has its place. I don't think it's just like, the internet didn't replace newspapers and magazines. They've been reduced, but they're still there, right? So all of these things kind of have their, for every season, for every time there's a season, right? I think that's the case for headsets. Now, what'll be interesting is when, and I don't think it'll be immediate, but in the, I'd say, months to years after the Apple's headset comes out, their whole, what's called the Vision Pro, and I'm going to say their vision for the Vision Pro seems to be, okay, they call it spatial computing, a term they actually ripped off from Magic Leap, just to be clear. That's sort of the Apple way, and Microsoft way for that matter. They're looking at, okay, how can we let people have screens anywhere and not just in their pockets or on a computer? But the thing I was most excited about, because I watched that whole keynote carefully and then I read all the documentation, is that they said every app that works on an iPad or an iOS is going to work in the Vision Pro. It's like, okay, that includes Safari. And anything you can do in Safari, their web browser, will also work in the Vision Pro. And I practically leaped out of my chair and clapped, right? Because I realized this stuff can work in there, right? They're not going to block that. They're not going to try to create a whole new splinter net, if anyone remembers that term. And you'll just have to see, it's going to be based on how we see people using things or not through the metrics, if they're engaged or not. I'd say also if they're, if they're informed or not, if they're, like how it makes people feel, how it changes the way they look at the world. Some things maybe will only happen or could only happen in a headset, right? But I don't think it's the right place to start. I think, I don't think it ever was, to be honest. I think it was just something new, and the new keeps coming. But the foundations of everything, which is open source and the open web, that has never changed. We better hope it doesn't change, right? If it does, then all of this is up in the air. So like that's sort of like for, part of digital citizenship, I think, is support and, talk about the open web, use the open web, the open internet rather, and then, put your money where your mouth is with that too. There could be one day attacks on the open web by these big 8 tech companies. It was attempted once before. There was a massive antitrust lawsuit over that, and Microsoft lost it. How do you know it won't be some other company, some other billionaire who then tries it again? I think we can almost expect that to happen. So. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.